And you can also surely be a guest to many people to whom you would never want to be a host. Now, tell me, Count, what does a guest want?" "I believe," said Augustus, "that if we do, as I think we ought to here, leave out the crude guest, who comes to be regaled, takes what he can get, and goes away. A guest wants first of all to be diverted, to get out of his daily monotony or worry. Secondly, the decent guest wants to shine, to expand himself and impress his own personality upon his surroundings. And thirdly, perhaps, he wants to find some justification for his existence altogether. But since you put it so charmingly, Signora, please tell me now, what does the hostess want?" "The hostess," said the young lady, "wants to be thanked." "The hostess wants to be thanked? What does that even mean? Is that, to answer Freud's question, what women want? A polite expression of gratitude? What about pleasure, kindness, loyalty, respect? And yet, decades later, I can see how this poetic discussion of the erotic, with only the most vague and delicate suggestion of the mechanics of sex, would have appealed to me at 13. How I longed to meet a man someday who would court me with language only a few steps removed from that of the medieval troubadours. How divine it would be to experience a seduction that would verge so closely on poetry. And how I wanted to be the sort of young woman who could travel on her own, charm a man with my courage and independence, and come up with the perfect punchline to answer his mannerly disquisition on what the sexes desire from each other. I can still see the charm in the passage, even though it seems quaint, artificial, hopelessly old-fashioned. What's more important is that reading it functions for me like a kind of time machine, transporting me to the back seat of our family car, crossing the Arizona desert, being urged to just look at the Grand Canyon while I was somewhere else, near Pisa in 1823, listening to a man and woman have the type of conversation that I hope to have someday with a handsome and preferably aristocratic stranger. All of which seems to suggest reading is not exactly like being alone. We are alone with the book we are reading, but we are also in the more ethereal company of the author and the characters that author has created. There I was in the car, with my parents in the front seat, my younger brother beside me, and Isak Dinesen, Count Augustus, and the brave little cross-dresser all floating around in my consciousness. We may find ourselves surrounded by dozens, even hundreds of imaginary people, or deep inside the mind of the man or woman whom the narrator has designated to stand at the center of the action. We can close the book and carry these characters around with us, much the way a child can transport any number of imaginary friends from place to place. And because they are imaginary, we can always stop reading without hurting their feelings, a transaction far less complicated than most of our dealings with flesh-and-blood human beings. Lately, it's been noted that this privacy has been at least partly compromised when we read on electronic devices that are able to monitor how much of a book we read, where we stop, and what we reread. It's disconcerting to think about, and yet, especially if we are as engrossed in a book as we wish to be, it's possible to forget about these invisible watchers, who at least aren't talking on or checking their phones. And of course, we can always read a physical book, which will never disclose the secrets of our reading habits. Reading and writing are solitary activities, and yet there is a social component that comes into play when we tell someone else about what we have read. An additional pleasure of reading is that you can urge and sometimes even persuade people you know and care about, and even people you don't know, to read the book you've just finished and admired, and that you think they would like too. We can talk about books to our friends, our colleagues, our students. We can form and enjoy communities that we wouldn't have otherwise had. Read Proust, and you have something in common with other readers of Proust. Not only the thrill of experiencing a marvelous and complex work of art, but the fact that you and those others now have, as your mutual acquaintances, his enormous cast of characters. You can gossip about people you know in common. Can you believe what happens to the Baron de Charlus by the end of the novel? Almost 20 years ago, the novelists Ron Hansen and Jim Shepard put together an anthology entitled You've Got to Read This, to which a group of writers contributed an introduction to a favorite short story of their own choosing.